You read your message one more time before sending it. Not to fix the grammar. That part is already fine. You're checking the tone. You remove a word that might sound too direct. Add a softener, maybe an emoji, just to make sure it doesn't land wrong. You read it again, this time imagining how they will feel when they see it. You try to predict the pause before they reply. You try to eliminate it. And only then do you press send. It happens in conversations too. You start a sentence, then adjust it halfway through. You laugh at things you don't fully agree with. You nod, even when something in you tightens slightly. In some rooms, your voice becomes lighter. In others, more careful. With certain people, you speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it feels risky. So you choose the version of yourself that will pass through unnoticed, or better, approved. And it works. People describe you as easy, considerate, good to be around. But there's a small delay in everything you do. A quiet calculation running in the background. A constant adjustment that no one else seems to notice, except you do. Because by the end of the day, you're not tired from what you did. You're tired from who you had to be while doing it. And the strange part is, you're not even sure when that started. You learned to scan people before you spoke to them. You noticed which tone made things smoother, which version of you made adults relax, which reactions caused a pause in the room, and which ones made everything tighten. So you adjusted. You became the one who didn't argue too much, the one who understood quickly, the one who didn't make things harder than they needed to be. When you agreed, things moved forward. When you stayed quiet, conflict passed faster. When you made yourself easy to be around, people stayed warm, and that warmth mattered, because you also saw the alternative, a slight change in someone's face when you pushed back. The silence that followed when you said too much. The way disappointment didn't always arrive as anger, but as distance, as withdrawal, as something quietly withheld. You felt the difference immediately. So you learned to reduce friction before it even started, not as a belief, as a reflex. You didn't sit down and decide to become agreeable. You repeated small adjustments that worked, again and again, until they stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like who you are. In some moments, approval came as praise. Being called easygoing, mature, thoughtful. You learned that being low maintenance wasn't just appreciated, it was rewarded. In other moments, it was more subtle. The tension that appeared when you disrupted expectations. The extra explanations you had to give just to justify a simple preference. The sense that being fully yourself required more effort than being slightly edited. So you edited. You softened opinions before they could land too hard. You anticipated reactions before they happened. You chose words that would be received well, not just words that were true. And over time, something very specific happened. You stopped measuring your behavior by how it felt to you and started measuring it by how it would land for someone else. That shift didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. It made relationships smoother. It prevented unnecessary conflict. It kept things stable, which is why it stayed. Because from the outside, nothing looked wrong. You weren't causing problems, you were solving them before they appeared. But underneath that efficiency, a quiet dependency was forming. The sense that acceptance had conditions, that ease in relationships had to be maintained, that being fully yourself without adjustment carried a risk you weren't willing to take without preparation. So you prepared, constantly, and eventually you forgot that there was ever a version of you that didn't. If this reflection resonates with you, subscribe to follow this psychological journey. Because the pattern didn't stop there, it followed you into places you didn't expect. You read your message again before sending it, then once more just to make sure the tone feels right. You remove a word that might sound too direct. Add an emoji to soften it. Pause. Send. Then, almost immediately, you reopen the conversation to check how it looks from the other side. In meetings, you feel the moment your opinion begins to form. It's there, clear enough. But before it reaches your mouth, something interrupts it. You adjust the wording. You search for a version that won't create friction. By the time you speak, it sounds slightly different than what you meant. Easier to accept, harder to recognize as yours. After conversations, your mind doesn't let go. It replays small details, the pause before they responded, the shift in their expression, that one sentence you could have phrased better. You imagine alternative versions of yourself in the same moment, more likable, more precise, less awkward. The interaction is over, but you're still inside it, editing something that no longer exists. With friends, you notice how often you say yes before checking how you actually feel. Plans, favors, conversations you don't have the energy for. You go along with it, and while you're there, you participate fully. You listen, respond, stay present. But underneath, something tightens. Not enough to stop you, just enough to stay with you. In relationships, you become highly attentive to shifts. A slower reply, a shorter message, a different tone. You don't react outwardly, not immediately. Instead, you adjust yourself. You become more patient, more understanding, more accommodating. You give a little more than you were going to, not because it feels right, but because it might stabilize something you can't quite name. Even silence becomes active. You hold back thoughts that feel too complicated, too heavy, too likely to be misunderstood. You tell yourself it's not worth it. That keeping things smooth is better than risking tension. So conversations stay on the surface longer than you intended. And over time, you notice how much of you never actually enters the room. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that builds from this. Not from doing too much, but from constantly adjusting how you do it. You're present in your life, but rarely at rest inside it, always slightly angled toward how it will be received. And the cost isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself clearly. It shows up as a quiet accumulation of things unsaid, choices slightly misaligned, effort that never quite resolves. But what's harder to notice is what this constant adjustment is slowly replacing. You notice it in small, almost invisible moments. Right before you speak, something in you pauses, not to think about what you mean, but to scan for how it might land. Your tone adjusts before your sentence even forms. You soften certain words, remove others entirely, add a slight smile that no one asked for. It happens fast enough that it feels natural, but it is not spontaneous. It is surveillance. Over time, you've learned to watch yourself the way other people might watch you. You track your expressions, your timing, your reactions. You predict discomfort before it happens and edit yourself to avoid it. And because this process runs constantly, you rarely experience your own responses in a direct way. They pass through a filter first. You don't just feel something, you check if it's acceptable to feel it. And this changes something subtle but important. Your attention shifts outward. Instead of being inside your own experience, you're slightly outside of it, observing, adjusting, managing. The room becomes the reference point. Other people's reactions become data you continuously interpret. A raised eyebrow, a pause, a shorter reply than expected. None of these are neutral to you. They are signals. Signals that something may be off. Signals that you may need to correct. So you do. You clarify what you said. You add context that no one asked for. You make your intention explicit, just in case it was misunderstood. You close the gap before it can widen. And if the response still feels uncertain, your mind stays there, replaying it, trying to locate the exact moment where things might have shifted. This is where disapproval stops being just a social discomfort and starts feeling like a threat. Not because something dramatic will happen, but because you've learned that being seen without managing the outcome carries risk. When you don't control how you're received, you are exposed to interpretations you cannot correct in real time, and that lack of control is what unsettles you. So you stay ahead of it. You anticipate. You pre-adjust. You shape yourself early so that nothing needs to be repaired later. But there is a cost. When most of your energy is spent predicting reactions, there is very little left for noticing your own. Your internal voice, the one that speaks before it is edited, gets quieter. Not because it disappeared, but because it is constantly interrupted. It starts to feel distant, less reliable, easier to override. And eventually, a strange reversal happens. You become highly skilled at reading others, but less certain about yourself. You can sense shifts in tone, mood, and approval with precision, but when it comes to your own stance, your own preference, your own limit, there is hesitation. Not confusion, hesitation. Because before anything becomes clear, it is already being evaluated for its impact. So the fear is no longer just, what if they reject me? It becomes, what if they see me and I can't shape what that means? That is a very different kind of exposure, and it raises a quiet question you may not have asked directly. If you stopped monitoring yourself this closely, what would actually come out? You notice how you add just a little more than necessary. An extra sentence in the message just to make sure it lands well. A softer tone than you actually feel. A quick, no worries at all when there is, in fact, some worry. You stay agreeable in small moments, not because you agree, but because disagreement feels like it might cost you something you can't quite name. And when that doesn't feel like enough, you adjust again. You explain yourself more carefully. You give context no one asked for. You anticipate the other person's confusion before it happens and try to remove it in advance. You become easier to understand, easier to accept, harder to question. For a moment, it works. The conversation stays smooth. There's no visible friction, no awkward silence, no shift in tone that suggests something went wrong. But the relief is short-lived. Because the next time, you feel the same pressure to manage it all again. So you try a different strategy. You become useful. You respond quickly. You solve problems before they fully form. You make yourself reliable in ways that go beyond what's required. You become the person people don't have to worry about. And again, it works briefly. You're appreciated, trusted, needed. But underneath that, something else grows quietly. A sense that your place depends on maintaining this level of effort. That if you stop, even slightly, something might shift. Not dramatically, just enough to make you uncertain again. So you compensate in another direction. You present yourself as competent, composed, in control. You choose your words carefully. You avoid showing confusion until you've already resolved it. You make sure that if you are seen at your best. This too reduces tension. People respond well to clarity, to capability, to someone who seems steady. But it comes with a quiet cost, because now, not only do you have to be accepted, you have to maintain the version of yourself that earned that acceptance. Each of these adjustments feels like progress. Like you're getting closer to a stable place where approval no longer feels uncertain. But they all share the same structure. You are still working for it, still monitoring, still adjusting, still calculating what will keep things smooth, predictable, safe. And that's why the tension never fully disappears. Because the problem was never that you weren't doing enough. It's that every solution you've tried assumes approval is something you can secure through better performance. And as long as that assumption stays in place, the effort never ends. But there's something more subtle happening beneath all of this, and it changes the direction entirely. You stop rewriting messages that already say what you mean. You let small silences sit without rushing to fill them. When someone looks slightly disappointed, you notice it, but you don't immediately move to fix it. Your behavior becomes quieter, but more exact. You answer the question that was asked, not the one that might keep things smoother. You say no without adding 3 extra reasons. You let a conversation end where it naturally ends, instead of extending it to secure a better impression. At first, this feels unfamiliar, almost like you're being abrupt, but you're not. You're just no longer adjusting every edge of yourself to match the room, and something subtle begins to shift. Boundaries stop carrying that sharp, guilty feeling. They don't feel like rejection anymore. They feel like accuracy, like placing things where they actually belong instead of where they will be best received. You're not colder. If anything, your reactions become more honest, more proportionate. You laugh when something is funny. You stay quiet when it isn't. There's less performance in it, less calculation. And in that space, a different kind of stability appears, not the fragile kind that depends on everyone staying pleased, but one that holds even when someone doesn't agree, doesn't approve, doesn't respond the way you hoped. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a decision. It shows up in small moments where you stop negotiating with every reaction around you. And without noticing exactly when it happened, you realize you're no longer waiting to be allowed to be yourself. If this felt familiar, subscribe to continue this psychological journey.